Time for us to talk about today's conversation, and we're focusing on what has been an alarm that was raised by the chairman of the Universal Basic Education Commission, who talked about the learning crisis in Nigeria, where young children at the basic level are unable to read, write, and also do simple mathematics, and that is despite the idea of embedding the local language or mother tongue into the curriculum of our schools as a language of instruction. So why is that failing? Why is that not enough to make a difference in impacting the lives and the education of the future generations? We'll be joined by some experts who have a thing or two to say about what's going on regarding this particular development. Join us on the program to add value to the conversation. We have virtually joining us from Adamawa, Dr. Agoso Bamaiyi, who is an author, an educationist, a writer, and also a life coach, joining us virtually from Yola via Zoom. Doctor, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Also joining us this morning is an international school inspector, an educationist, an author, and psychologist. Imagine that. Moronike Adeyinka is also joining us virtually for a conversation on this development. Good morning to you both, and thank you very much for joining us on Daybreak.
Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having us.
Right. Let's start with, first of all, your reactions to this revelation that Nigeria is suffering from a learning crisis in spite of all of the mechanisms that have been put in place to simplify and regularize even our local dialects as part of the instructional language for education. Let me start with you, first of all, Mrs. Moronike. What are your thoughts about it?
Well, if we want to be, serious, and if we want to be truthful, I'd like to say, we would know that this was coming, because the problem doesn't just go away because we have now introduced learning with our mother language. What are we teaching? What is the curriculum that we're teaching? And who are the people teaching this curriculum? Those two things are essential. What we are teaching and who are the people teaching. So yes, are the people teaching qualified to teach? Do they know how and what to teach? And then what are they teaching? Is the curriculum simplified? Is it straightforward? And are the children fully engaged in learning? As you would find, what does the environment look like? I mean, just the other day, the FCT minister merged two classes so that children could, move away from learning under the tree. So we have to look at those three essentially: where they're learning, who's teaching them, and what they're learning. Those three would be able to provide guidance on what we need to do and why we got here.
Dr. Agoso, your opening remarks on this conversation, and especially what Mrs. Moronike has pointed out with regards to who is teaching what are they learning, and where are they providing the education. What should we have done, as a country, as local education authority, to lay the foundation for the kind of results that we expect?
Thank you very much. Let me add two things to the three mentioned here. And what I want to add is the environment. Is the learning environment conducive for learning across the country? The answer is no. Generally, in most cases, it's no. You have schools that are not fenced in. They are literally like part of the the community, people walking through the schools, for their businesses and all that, lots of distraction. The classrooms are not in good condition. We are serious about the safety and education of our children. We will not allow them to even stay in such classrooms. A lot of schools, they learn under trees and sheds that they can find. And so all those things come together and provide a huge distraction, preventing the children from learning, even where the teachers are good and the curriculum is also good. In the case in Nigeria, the teachers need to be retrained and trained some more, and the curriculum is really not up to par. The other thing I want to add is the learning materials, the learning aids. Are they available? The consumables. You remember, these are children. You don't just stand and talk to them. You need to get them engaged with their hands, with their eyes, and all that. Are the materials there? So these are some of the things, and the answer again is generally no.
Right. And as far as this new national alert is concerned, because what apparently the executive secretary of the Universal Basic Education, Dr. Hamid Boboy, is saying is with regards to our performance, we have basic knowledge that students in primary school cannot do. Simple mathematics, they cannot read and they cannot write. And you get a sense that this has been going on for quite some time. We've had several papers, several presentations, several reports that have indicted the quality of public education in this country. First of all, it doesn't come as a surprise to most people who are well aware of the gaps in our education system, from the funding to all of the issues that you both have raised. But do you get a sense that we're beginning to sound like a broken record now, especially if we're hearing from the government, run agencies around what the problems are, because it doesn't appear that there's any solution in sight. I mean, even the whole idea of embedding or using local dialects as part of the instructional language was supposed to be a panacea, so to say, to bridge the gap, because apparently English is a lot more difficult to understand as an instructional language, because some of these students or pupils at the community level are not used to hearing people speak English. And even with that, we're unable to make headway. What do you reckon is the whole approach here?
Well, if I might come in here, I want to say that, like you mentioned earlier, we're sounding like a broken record, and it's unfortunate. And it's the same thing, not only with the educational sector, but with virtually every sector in Nigeria. We keep talking about the problems, but we do not take the actions. And there are things that can be done. Private schools in Nigeria have shown that these things can be done. My children attended private primary schools, and before they started, I was in Lagos then. Before they started primary school itself, pre-primary, they could read. I attended a public school, and the truth of the matter is, I got to the secondary school before I could properly read. So, what are the private schools doing that public schools are not doing? We need to look into this. Again, it's an issue of the quality of the teachers. It has to do with the teaching aids and learning aids. It has to do with the environment. It has to do with the commitment of the administration to providing quality at that level, to capturing the attention of the children and keeping it and getting it through. I mean, it's good that we want to instruct them in our native languages, and that will help to an extent. But if the quality is not there, the concentration is not there, then of course the local language is not really going to help. And that is what we are seeing. We've introduced learning in mother tongue, but we've not gotten the results we're looking for, because the quality is absent. The materials that are necessary are also absent.
Okay. Mrs. Moronike, listening to Dr. Agoso there, I was wondering whether we are just fascinated by the idea, of introducing this mother tongue as something we see as the silver lining. Do you think that we have the right I mean, when it comes to standardization and implementation, do you think we have developed the instruments, that would support the delivery of learning in mother tongue? We have not succeeded in doing that with English, which is broadly implemented across board. How much more do you think we can succeed? Is this a wishful thinking, or should we basically just strengthen the language of instruction as we currently have? What exactly agitates your mind when you listen to some of these propositions?
Yeah, I would say that it's a good decision we took to teach in the mother language. I mean, that's the child's first language. That's the language of comfort for them. So it's easier for them to learn because it's also the language of the environment. So they would learn easier and faster. If we're taking things in order of priority, I would say that the first thing we and these things are not well, I won't say they're not expensive because they will be on the larger scale. Um, but we can the first thing we would need to do is to develop a standardized curriculum for each level that we're teaching. Even though it's in mother tongue, it has to be structured. It has to scaffold. What a child can learn as 3 years is different from what he can learn as 4 years. So learning has to scaffold, and then the teachers have to be trained on how to deliver the curriculum and how to improvise. Because just like Doctor was saying, children in the private school start to learn sounds of the English language at about 3 years old. And it is expected that by the time they're 5 or 6, they're very fluent readers. That can happen anywhere, but we know the restrictions of the public education. So I think training the teachers and a very well trained teacher would be able to improvise even where you don't have enough learning materials, even where you don't, even where it's not entirely ideal. But two things: the material, that's the curriculum that should be taught, and in good order, so that the materials are appropriate for each age group of the children, and secondly, the teachers. Those two, I mean, without those, there's hardly any results we can get. It's a good idea to teach in the mother tongue, in the mother language. I mean, it's fantastic. Incidentally, um, it's a good idea, but we just have to do it right, so that we're not doing it just for the sake of doing it, and then we don't get the results that we should.
Right.
So we need to do it right.
And Mrs. Adeyinka, do you get a sense that we've put the cart before the horse here, especially looking at the gaps within the sector itself, whether it's the resources around the workforce, for instance? Do we have teachers who can teach in those, or is this information transferable? I mean, it's one thing to speak Hausa, Tiv, Igbo, or Yoruba, for instance. I believe also that there are some languages that have made some sort of headway in that area, especially the three most spoken languages in the country, whether it's Hausa, Igbo, or Yoruba, because they've been used. I mean, we still have subjects taught in those languages. But what about some of the other languages that we've not had teachers for? Are these curriculums easily transferable from the English text to local dialects? Do our local dialects have the structure to contain the information, so that we're not just transferring information without necessarily making an impact? What are your thoughts about that? Because you did talk about the scaffolding, the structure that needs to be provided. Do you, from your assessment, do you think we've done the needful in that area?
Yes, we did put the cart before the horse. Definitely, we did put the cart before the horse. We weren't quite ready. I mean, as with many other things that we do, we just, oh, this is a good idea, and then we just do it. So I think we weren't quite prepared. Because even for communities, I mean, we can't translate all texts into all languages, all local languages, but we can group into major languages in different areas, and then it makes translating the English text into those languages of, it makes it easier. Definitely we would not, if we're looking at each individual area. I mean, we probably have about 200 and over 200 languages in Nigeria. We can't teach in those languages, but we have to identify languages, because for different groups, you would find that they have a major language that almost everyone understands. Even though I have my own dialect, for instance, we have Yoruba that sort of um, covers like 3, 4, 5 states. You know, so we do that, and we do that all over the country, and translate the English text into those major. And if we do that, we probably would have about 15 or 20 languages that we're teaching in. And then we're able to train teachers because it's easier, you know. So it's a lot of planning that did not go into it. A lot of planning didn't go into it.
All right, Dr. Agoso, Abdullahi talked about foundational issues, the substructural issues that are basically not there, or that are falling apart over the years, that seem to now impact the superstructure. Basically, we have an educational system as it is that sits on nothing, especially the public education. What can we do going forward, in fixing this substructure, in backtracking? We have seen how poorly, I dare to say very poorly, how the state governments have managed basic education. Whatever is left of public education in Nigeria is probably what is in the hands of the federal government, which is tertiary education, which by my own reckoning, and I'm sure you agree with me, is also struggling to meet global best practice. But what can we do to arrest basic education? Because what we have seen with functional climes is that once you get this basic education right, half the time, over 50% of their populations don't even go ahead to seek a tertiary education. They get that basic literacy and numeracy, then they acquire a lifelong skill, and they are good to go. What exactly can we do to fix this problem? Do we just consider we have lost it at that level and leave whatever is left that can be salvaged by private education? What can we do at this level?
And we must not give up. I mean, there are several things we can do. One of them is certainly not giving up. We have no choice but to work on fixing education in Nigeria. Like you observed there, basic education is necessary. It's very, very important. I mean, in developed countries, they give emphasis to this because it gives foundation. It gives foundation to their citizens, and the citizens can then go on and build on that foundation. If you get it right at that level, and it covers a majority of the people, then you are laying the groundwork for greatness for your country. For success, for prosperity in all areas of life. Because if you do not get the basic education right, no matter what you do later, it will just be remedial. So what I'm suggesting, and I'm suggesting this based on the statistics on ground, if you look at the number of our children, school-age children that are out of school, you look at the number of street kids that we have, you look at the number of our girls that are not in school, we have an emergency. And for that reason, I suggest strongly that the federal government, along with the state governments, should declare an emergency on education. And this is not just, a council declaration where you sit in executive council and just declare, but it should be practical. When you declare an emergency, it means that you are going to move resources, you are going to prioritize that sector and then move resources, redundant resources from other sectors into this sector and work on it hands-on to make sure that you bring it back to where it should be. That should be done with education. Because you see, there is no future for this country. There's no future for any individual, at least not a good future, without sound education. When we play with education like we've done in Nigeria and we continue to do, we're playing with the future of our country. Where will we be if we do not have a human capital that is highly developed? And basic education provides that foundation. So we should treat it as an emergency at the federal, state, and local government levels, put in resources, training teachers, building schools, providing learning and teaching aids, etc., as an emergency, and that is what we can do. Otherwise, anything we do will just continue to perpetuate this bad situation we find ourselves in.
Right. Okay. Let's get back to Mrs. Adeyinka, who I believe is has an engagement to attend to in a couple of minutes time. But just before you go, just to piggyback off of what Dr. Agoso just said right now, do you think we're treating this like the crisis that it is, following what the executive secretary of UBEC had to say? Do you think that there is some sort of urgency that the people in power, the stakeholders at both federal and state levels, do you think we're treating this like a crisis? What is your reading of the situation? Can you just unmute your microphone?
Yes, I have done that. Thank you. I'll say we're not, because governance is usually very far away from the people. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can. Go ahead, please.
We can hear you loud and clear. Please go ahead.
So, I think that government has to be more involved in the grassroots. The basic education is at the grassroots level. It's the closest actually to the people, so the government has to become closer, and then thereafter we need to involve the private sector. The private education has taken over by long shots by now, which shouldn't be. Education is the responsibility of the government. So I think that there's something the public, the private sector is doing right that needs to be transferred to the public sector. So there needs to be some sort of interrelationship, that then makes it clear even to the private sector that there's a problem that we all as Nigerians have to be engaged in. It's not just the problem of the government, it's not just the problem of those areas that are lacking in the basic skills to develop their young children. It's our collective problem, and we have to treat it as such. Apart from the first level, as Doctor says, declare a state of emergency and then let all hands be on deck, including the hands of every private organization in the education sector.
All right, Mrs. Moronike Adeyinka, I want to thank you very much for finding time to join us and share your perspective with us this morning.
Thank you.
Viewers, we have to let her go to attend to other pressing engagements. We hope that as time goes on, we will find time to bring her back and espouse and expand on some of her thoughts as far as rescuing the Nigerian education system is concerned. Once again, thank you very much for finding time to be here.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Dr. Agoso, coming back to you, she's talked about an approach, to rescue basic education, and she tinkered with the idea of some kind of handshake between the public and private sector. We talked about declaring an emergency, but how do we go about these emergencies? Like she said, the private sector had since sailed, away from the dock. But how do we partner with the private sector to rescue what is left, of the soul of public education? Do you see a partnership that brings private sector management into public sector resources? Do we trust that we have the expertise within the public sphere or sector, to provide the kind of rescue that we seem to be suggesting in the studio this morning?
It's really important that the government, apart from declaring emergency and moving resources, redundant resources in other sector into the educational sector, it's important. It's obvious that the government will have to reach out to the private sector to, get from their experience and bring in experts and really have all those meetings and conferences that will build on the declaration of emergency and make sure that it comes to fruition. Let me tell you a brief story. In my hometown, a Ghanaian came in the 80s, in the early 80s. A Ghanaian lady started a private school, and this private school went ahead to become the standard school in my town, and then she moved back to Ghana and started the school, while the one here in Nigeria continued, but she was not here anymore personally. She was based in Ghana. The Ghanaian government decided to fix public education and worked on that. And when they got to a point where they were sure the quality of public education was at par with private education, they banned private schools. So she had to return to Nigeria. She's back in Nigeria now. And we need to learn from the experience of Ghana. We need to do something like was done in Ghana. We might not ban private schools like they did in Ghana, but it is obvious that we have to come into a sort of a cooperation, a sort of an understanding, right, to move our educational sector forward.
Doctor, do you think that that is also a part of the problem? That the government seems to think that, listen, there is an alternative in private sector education, and that is why we're not putting all our eggs in the basket of solving the dilemma that has undermined the public education sector. Do you think because of the proliferation of all these private schools, even in villages now you have private schools springing up, do you think that is why the government is sort of, quote unquote, relaxed about fixing the problem?
That is part of the problem. That is actually part of the problem. Because some of these private schools are owned by government officials, by politicians, through their surrogates. Some of them openly. Yeah, we know that this school belongs to this particular politician or this government official. Some of those private schools you're mentioning in villages and small towns, it used to be in cities and big towns, but now small towns and villages, you have private schools springing up, are owned by high-ranking civil servants and politicians who are in the state capitals, and they have people running those schools for them. And it's like with the electricity sector at a point where people who are operating our electricity sector, our power sector, were the same people involved in the importation of generators and all that. And they didn't want all the interventions that government was doing to succeed in that area, because it has to be strong here. Government has to be strong and do what is necessary to ensure that we bring our educational sector back on stream, and get it moving very well. And if it means stopping private schools, why not? I mean, if we can provide the quality that private schools are providing, then why not do that? But as long as we leave this and it's a business, there would always be people in government and politics that will sabotage government policies just so they can remain in business.
All right. One of the problems we also talked about in passing is funding. Little wonder why you talked about declaring emergency in the educational sector, and you said that would mean moving fund from idle place. Looking at the overall framework, Nigeria's overall framework, and the fact that this economy is hemorrhaging. There are several critical sectors that are begging for extra funds today as we speak that can't get. Health is a typical example. You know the ratio of doctors to the number of citizens that we have. You know how dilapidated the primary healthcare systems are. We are all conversant with the conversation around food inflation and how the minimum wage today cannot take you to a bus stop. Realistically, do you think that within our current budget framework that we can find the fundings that are necessary to deploy in the educational sector and begin what would be a comprehensive rescue mission?
No, not within the current budget framework. The current budget framework, which we have operated for 2.5, maybe 3 decades now, does not prioritize education at all. Remember, the UNESCO standard is for governments to allocate up to 26% of their annual budgets to education. In Nigeria, for the past 20 years, it's not been up to 10%. So if we go by this current budget, we will not get the kind of results that we need to get. So our population is growing. We have a lot more people that need to be educated, but the resources going into education are literally dwindling. So government needs to think outside the box. One of the things that need to be done is, how do we reduce the cost of governance and then take the money saved from that and put it into education? It's funny that in a country where we have 109 senators, 360 members of legislature, House of Representatives, along with their staff, their supporting staff and all that, they're getting a budget that is higher than the budgetary allocation to education for 200 million people. I mean, for the citizens of a country that is over 200 million. I mean, it's an abnormally, an indictment. It shows that we do not see education as, we do not give it the value we need to give it. Education is the most important sector in the life of a country. There is no future, at least not a great future, for any country without sound education for its citizens, especially basic education. We should be acting like it's an emergency. There is fire on the mountain and everybody is acting normally. If our politicians have the political will, they can find the resources that are necessary and put them into education. They always find resources for things that are important to them, things that they prioritize. They always find the resources to do those things. If they prioritize education today, they will find the resources to put in there. But given our current budgetary framework, we are not going to get the kind of results that we should get, that we can get, and that everybody who knows the value of education is hoping that we can get.
Talking about the subnationals, Dr. Agoso, what can we say about their performance level? Because when you look at the data around out-of-school children, issues around enrollment, some of the structural issues around lack of infrastructure, the remuneration and welfare of teachers, and some of those issues. We've had states where, you know, there's always a tug of war between the state government and the union of teachers regarding their welfare or even regarding their jobs, whether it's safe or not, because we've had several conversations about the quality of the teachers that we have in this country. Give me a sense of, you know, what you make of the performance of the subnationals vis-a-vis what we have as a country towards addressing the gaps in the sector, especially at the basic level.
The way it stands right now, the majority of the responsibility for the basic sector is with the local governments at the execution level, you know, and then secondary school is with the state governments. Now, any local government chairman who wants to make a difference as far as basic education is concerned within his domain can make a difference. But the thing is that local government chairmen all across the country do not stay long. So if you have a chairman that is involved he has his hands on the plow, he's doing the things that are necessary. It's not going to be around for long to make the necessary difference. The second problem with local government chairmen is that they are impeded, hampered to a very large extent by the governors, because governors across the country have pocketed local government administration and all that. Forget about the noise they make about local government autonomy. In reality, the local governments are not autonomous. They answer to the governor. They only do, and in a very large extent, only what the governor wants them to do. The other thing is that at the state level, the same thing. If you have a governor that wants to make a difference in secondary school education, he can make a difference. For him, it's a little better. He will be around for 8 years if he wins.
It appears that we have a bit of a challenge with the connectivity to Dr. Agoso. We're working on that to bring him back on to finish his line of thought. But this is a conversation that I imagine most Nigerians have an opinion or two about. And most of it is, once again, we're opening the book of lamentations here Sunday, lamenting over what the problem is, even when the solution is supposed to be obvious, funding, addressing some of the infrastructural gaps. I think we have Dr. Agoso back. Doctor, please finish your line of thought.
What I'm saying is, even in a situation where you have a governor that is willing to make a difference, and you have a local government that is willing to make a difference, and the governor is willing to cooperate with the local government chairman for basic education to be rescued, both of them face the limitation of funds, because they only operate in most of these states with the funds that come to them as allocations from the federal government, and these funds are limited. So ultimately, because of the money that is available to them, there's very little that a willing governor and a willing local government can do as far as primary and secondary education is concerned within their domain. So it goes back to the federal government. That's why earlier on I said that the federal government should declare an emergency, and this should be done in cooperation with state governments, so that it's federally funded, it's covered at the federal level, but it's executed at the state level and the local government. There has to be this cooperation. And let me add also that there are resources available in bilateral cooperations and partnerships that we have with various governments and various international organizations, various UN sub-organizations and various organizations around the world, that a local government chairman, a state governor, or the federal government itself can tap into that and get additional resources to save the educational sector. So the government has to really sit down and look at this, so that we don't have heads of commissions just talking about the difficulties they are facing, but that at the cabinet level, the government is really looking into this, actively looking for resources, bringing in resources, doing the necessary thing to save our educational sector. I will repeat this, that education is fundamental to the future of this country. It should be a priority. Therefore, our politicians should prioritize it. All hands should be on deck to ensure that we save this sector so we can give our children a great tomorrow and give our country a great tomorrow.
All right, Dr. Agoso, talking about resources there, I know that it is not a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. Some states in Nigeria are more endowed than others. So probably at their level, it's not all about resources, more as it is about deploying the right kind of strategy. You will recall in the early days of our return to this current democracy, in some states, the question was about addressing quality. The government was willing to provide the matching grant, but it was about fixing infrastructures, maintaining infrastructures, returning discipline, returning, quality control, basically. For some states like Anambra and a number of other states, for them, they did some retrospecting and returned some of these schools to missionary owners whom they believe when it comes to administration and quality control, will probably do a better job whilst providing funding, for teachers, emoluments and all of that. So they knowing fully well that finding the funds within those sectors will be very difficult, but they trust them to maintain quality and all. Do you think that what we need across the country is a one-size-fits-all thing? What do you think would probably be discouraging some of those international funding from going to our schools? Because you can't always ask people to bring money when they look at the structure, the non-existent structure. It just basically feels like spitting into the ocean. What kind of initial commitment, or what the banks would describe as equity contribute, what kind of sweat equity are we putting on the ground to indicate that we are serious about these reforms and that our international or local partners can trust us? Because we can do adopt a school initiative for our corporate entities rather than scatter some of these corporate social responsibility fundings that we have into sectors that are non-impactful. But for the first instance, what kind of groundwork do we need to do to first of all communicate our intent and our seriousness to attract some of these partnership and funding?
That's right. It's really not a one-size-fits-all. States like Rivers or Lagos State and some other states in the south and a very few states in the north do have resources that they can throw at education and make a major difference. And you go to states like Lagos, this has been done, and there's also an ongoing process to standardize education. One other state that has actually cashed into these bilateral partnerships and understandings that I mentioned earlier is Borno State. It's recovering from decades of insurgency. The insurgency is still ongoing, but not as bad as it used to be a number of years ago. But the investments made in education in Borno is fantastic. If you given the fact that it's a state that is under insurgency, and a lot of those resources came from international partners. Now, what we need to do. What we need to do actually is to ensure that we deal with corruption, because a lot of our partners will not give resources knowing that those resources will be stolen and personalized. If we bring in checks and balances that ensure that whatever monies come in go into the work that the monies were given for in the first place, and we prove it to these people how serious we are, then of course they'll be willing to give the money. The other thing I need to add is that some of these funds are actually, the state governments have to give a matching grant. They would say we will give such an amount, but the state government would have to give this percentage. And it is when the state government puts that percentage in the account and they see it, then they release their part. So these are some of the checks and the balances that we're talking about. But you're right, when you observe there, no international partner would like to give money as much as they would love to give the money, knowing fully well that it will be stolen and taken away. But if we have checks and balances in place to ensure that these monies are used for the reason they are given, then they will give it. And if we do a first project with them and they see that it was properly done, then they will be willing to give some more. So monies are there. We just have to think out of the box and be able to raise this money. We can do partnerships with corporate institutions in the country. If we declare an emergency, then we get them on board. We get our banks, our industries, these big companies, oil companies, etc., on board. And they will be willing to give certain percentages as their contribution to revamping education in Nigeria. And as long as it is recognized as a part of their social corporate responsibility. These are things that can be done. But as long as we sit back and just think about them and not attempt them, then it will not be done and we will remain in this sorry state.
Right. I think we're in agreement that while there are global partners on education, the partnership seem to be experiencing some misalignment between what the global partners want as targets, as goals, and what our political leaders have been able to deliver so far. Because, I mean, the scale of the problem continues to widen while the scale of the solution is further shrinking. Dr. Agoso, we're going to have to leave it here for now. But thank you, as always, for your invaluable contribution and analysis on this conversation. Really appreciate you very much for joining us on Daybreak this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Right. And of course,